The night air was thick with tension, the city lights flickering like a nervous heartbeat. Zayden Croswell's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath uneven as he darted down the narrow alleyway behind the towering glass facade of Croswell Industries. His suit, once pristine, was now a crumpled armor against the danger that had pursued him, shadowy figures, their intentions as sharp and cold as the knives he imagined they carried. The pounding of his heart matched the rhythm of his escape, a drumbeat that refused to let him slow down. The door to the cafe swung open with a soft jingle, and Zayden stumbled inside, brushing rain-soaked hair from his forehead. The warm glow of amber lights and the gentle murmur of conversations enveloped him, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. He paused for a moment, letting the sound of quiet laughter and clinking cups calm the storm inside his mind. "Excuse me," a soft voice broke through his haze, and he looked up. She was standing there, tall and graceful, with skin that glowed like polished mahogany under the cafe lights. Her eyes, wide and expressive, were framed by long, coiled hair that cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, professional enough for a student or young professional, yet somehow carrying the aura of someone destined to command attention without even trying. "Can I share this table?" she asked again, her voice hesitant but laced with confidence. Zayden's mind flickered, caught between the adrenaline of his escape and the sudden, inexplicable pull toward this stranger. He studied her for a heartbeat, noting the slight tremor in her fingers as she gestured toward the empty chair across from him. Something about her presence made him pause, not the danger he had narrowly escaped, not the billion-dollar deal he had almost lost tonight, but her. "Sure," he managed, his voice low, roughened by exertion. He motioned to the chair, his fingers lingering just a moment too long on the edge of the polished wood. She smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't feel like it belonged to someone her age. It had depth, as if she'd seen more of life than most, yet still held onto a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. As she settled into the chair, Zayden caught himself studying the lines of her face, the curve of her lips as they pressed together in thought. He hated how much his pulse quickened. He hated even more that he didn't want it to stop. "I'm Nalia," she said, extending a hand with a mix of politeness and warmth that was almost magnetic. "Zayden," he replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, controlled, everything he projected to the world, but he noticed her fingers lingered just a second longer than expected, like she wanted to memorize the touch. For a moment, the world outside the cafe ceased to exist. The chaos of corporate warfare, the danger that stalked him, the cold, calculating life he had built, it all felt distant. Here, in this small bubble of amber light and quiet murmurs, the most dangerous thing wasn't the people chasing him, it was the way her eyes seemed to see him, really see him. "So, rough night?" Nalia asked, tilting her head, her tone teasing but gentle. Zayden exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. "You could say that," he replied, choosing his words carefully. It wasn't just rough, it was a nightmare with claws. But there was something about her that made him want to say more, to confess the truth of the fear and adrenaline and exhaustion he had carried into this cafe. He resisted. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you just need a table to rest at, even if it's with a stranger." There was an innocence in her statement that struck him, as if she spoke of simple truths he'd long forgotten. He wanted to tell her that the world was never that simple, that danger lurked behind every corner of his life, but instead he nodded, letting the words remain unspoken. The cafe hummed around them, the soft scrape of a chair, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low buzz of quiet conversations. And yet, in that small space, time seemed to bend. Each moment stretched, elongating the seconds into something intimate, something perilously close to connection. Zayden found himself laughing softly at one of her observations about the books lining the small shelves in the cafe. He hated that the sound felt so natural, so uncharacteristically relaxed, but he couldn't stop himself. And when she smiled, truly smiled this time, it was as though the world outside could explode and it would not matter. "You have very expressive eyes," he said before he could stop himself, his tone unexpectedly vulnerable. Nalia's brow lifted, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "Do I?" she asked, teasing him, but there was a hint of curiosity in her tone that suggested she noticed the way he looked at her too. "Yes," he admitted, leaning back, feeling an unfamiliar warmth bloom in his chest. They notice things." Her smile faltered just slightly, replaced by a thoughtful, almost wary expression. "I notice things too," she said quietly. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken understanding that something had shifted in the brief time they had shared this table. Zayden's gaze flicked to the window, where shadows still moved, silent and patient. He knew danger hadn't vanished, that the threat outside was real, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to leave this moment, this table, this woman. The bell above the cafe door chimed again, and a gust of cold wind swept through. Nalia shivered and crossed her arms instinctively, and Zayden stood without thinking, draping his suit jacket around her shoulders. "Why?" she asked softly, a little caught off guard. "Because you shouldn't be cold," he said, his voice low, carrying more than mere concern. It was a quiet promise, one she wasn't ready to decode yet. She looked at him then, truly looked, and for a second, the bustling cafe, the city outside, and the danger looming beyond faded. Her heart raced, caught between caution and something unfamiliar, something magnetic. Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome," he replied, but the words felt inadequate for the pull between them. Neither of them noticed the man slipping past the alley entrance, watching them from the shadows. Not yet. Not until later. For now, they were alone at the table, two strangers whose worlds should never collide, yet somehow already had. And Zayden Croswell, billionaire, master of control, felt the first crack in the armor he had built around his heart. The cafe hummed with life, but for Zayden and Nalia, the rest of the world seemed to blur. He watched her laugh quietly at a comment a barista made, the sound warm and light, like a gentle melody cutting through the storm he carried inside. He wanted to memorize it. He wanted to lock that sound away, somewhere safe. "You come here often?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. She tilted her head, considering. "Not really. I usually study at the library, but tonight I needed space." "You?" "Sometimes," he said. He leaned back in the chair, hands clasped loosely on the table, studying her with a fascination that bordered on obsession. "It's quieter here than the streets. Less suffocating." Nalia's eyes softened, and she reached for her cup, fingers brushing the rim in a nervous gesture. "Sounds like you've had a rough day," she said, her voice gentle, carrying a note of concern that made his chest tighten. "You could say that," he replied, but this time there was no deflection. He wanted to tell her everything, the chase through the alley, the danger he'd narrowly escaped, but there was a line he couldn't cross, not yet. Not with her. Her smile returned, small but knowing. "I get it. Some days, you just survive. And then you come to a cafe and someone asks to share a table, and it feels like the world is letting you breathe for a second." Zayden's heart skipped. The way she phrased it, as if their meeting was some fated coincidence, hit him harder than he expected. "And does it help?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Yes," she said softly. "It does." For a moment, neither spoke, just sat there, letting the silence stretch. The quiet between them was heavy with meaning, and Zayden realized he hadn't felt something like this in years, someone who made the danger, the world, and all his responsibilities fade into background noise. "I should probably go," Nalia said after a moment, glancing at her watch. Her tone carried reluctance, as if leaving was a betrayal of this fragile connection. "You can stay," Zayden said, surprising himself. "Not like I can stop you, but, stay. Just a little longer." Her gaze lifted to meet his, and in that instant, a spark passed between them, fragile but undeniable. She smiled, hesitant but willing, and settled back into her chair. The conversation turned casual after that, drifting from books to movies to the oddities of city life. But beneath the light-hearted banter, Zayden could feel the pull, the gravity of Nalia's presence. Each laugh, each tilt of her head, each fleeting glance sent a jolt through him he couldn't explain, couldn't control. "I have to warn you," she said suddenly, leaning forward slightly. "I'm a terrible cook. Like, catastrophic. You would not survive my experiments in the kitchen." Zayden chuckled, a genuine sound that surprised even him. "I've survived worse," he said, and he meant it. Yet the words weren't about food, they were about life, about danger, about everything he'd faced and survived. And somehow, she made all of it seem lighter, more bearable. The subtle hum of the cafe was interrupted by the jingle of the door again, and Zayden's instincts snapped. His body stiffened, eyes scanning the room. Nothing. Just another customer, carrying a briefcase and a tired expression. But the tension lingered in him, a shadow he couldn't shake. "You okay?" Nalia asked, noticing the change in his posture. "Yeah," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just reflexes." Her eyes studied him, perceptive and sharp. "You don't strike me as someone who's used to relaxing," she said, almost accusingly. He met her gaze, and for the first time, he wondered if she could see the truth, the danger, the secrets, the life he led behind closed doors. "You're perceptive," he said finally, almost a whisper. I have to be, she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. Life teaches you quickly when to notice things. The connection deepened, subtle yet intense. Zayden found himself leaning closer, drawn by her presence in a way that made the world outside seem irrelevant. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from everything, even if it meant exposing himself to dangers he would rather avoid. You know, he began, his voice low, most people wouldn't just ask to sit with me. They'd probably walk away. She tilted her head, curiosity mixed with a hint of amusement in her eyes. And yet, here I am, she said softly. Yeah, he admitted, feeling a warmth spreading through him he hadn't anticipated. Here you are. The door jingled again, and this time, Zayden's eyes flicked to the shadows outside. A sense of unease settled over him like a heavy cloak. He couldn't shake it. Danger was still out there, waiting, patient, relentless. But as he looked back at Nalia, laughing softly at some remark he barely remembered, the unease didn't matter, at least, not entirely. Later, as they prepared to leave, Zayden walked her to the door, the cool night air hitting their faces. She shivered slightly, and without thinking, he draped his jacket over her shoulders again. Thanks, she said, warmth and surprise in her voice. Of course, he said, forcing a casual tone he didn't feel. Stay careful, okay? Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, it felt like time had paused, holding them suspended in that fragile bubble of connection. As she walked away, Zayden's gaze followed her until she disappeared into the night. He wanted to call out, to stop her, to tell her not to leave, but he didn't. Something inside him whispered that this was only the beginning. That their story was far from over. And indeed, the night was only just starting. Shadows stirred in the alleyways, and Marek Vale, a man who held grudges like weapons, had already noticed her presence. Zayden's instincts screamed at him, warning of the danger that his heart refused to acknowledge. He clenched his fists, a quiet promise forming in his mind. Whoever Marek was, whoever dared to threaten what he had just found, would regret it. Nalia would not be touched. She would not be harmed. And he would make sure of it, no matter the cost. The city pulsed around him, indifferent and relentless, but Zayden Crosswell had found something worth fighting for. Something worth risking everything. And as he stepped back into the night, following at a distance to ensure she reached her apartment safely, he knew, without a shadow of doubt, that nothing in his carefully controlled life would ever be the same again. Zayden kept a careful distance as he followed Nalia through the quiet streets, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. He could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him, a mixture of adrenaline and concern. Something about the way she moved, careful yet unaware, made him tense. He didn't have the luxury of letting his guard down, not when danger was so close. Meanwhile, Nalia hummed softly to herself, unaware of the presence trailing her. She had a routine, a sense of order in the chaos of graduate school and late-night part-time jobs. The thought of someone watching her didn't cross her mind. She had no reason to suspect she was being followed. Zayden's phone vibrated in his pocket, a subtle reminder from his private security team. Multiple unidentified men were in the area, lingering near her apartment building. His chest tightened. He had known danger before, but the thought of it reaching her, of anyone daring to touch her, made his blood boil in a way he wasn't used to. He slowed, letting her reach her apartment building first, staying in the shadows as he watched her swipe her keycard and disappear inside. Only when the door closed did he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The next day, Zayden found himself back at the same cafe, unable to resist the pull of the table where they had first met. He arrived early, eyes scanning every corner of the room, every person who entered. Nalia arrived a few minutes later, smiling as she spotted him, carrying a stack of textbooks. "You're early," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I like to make sure my favorite table isn't taken," he replied, his voice low but teasing. He noticed the faint blush that crossed her cheeks. "I should warn you," she said, arranging her books neatly, "today is going to be boring. I have a mountain of work to get through." "Boring or not," he said, "I'd rather spend it here than anywhere else." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and for a moment, he saw her eyes widen, a flicker of surprise and something else, curiosity? Amusement? Shining through. She shook her head, smiling faintly, but didn't reply immediately. They spent the next hour in quiet companionship. Nalia worked on her assignments while Zayden sipped his coffee, occasionally glancing at her, memorizing her expressions, the way she chewed her lip when concentrating, the soft hum she made when she was focused. It was intoxicating. But the calm was short-lived. Zayden's phone buzzed again, a discreet alert from his security team. Multiple men were spotted near the cafe. He stiffened, eyes scanning the room for threats. Nalia noticed the change instantly. "Zayden, what's wrong?" she asked, concern threading through her voice. "Nothing," he said quickly, forcing a smile. But the unease didn't fade. The faintest shadow outside the window caught his attention, and he felt a cold rush of fear. He had no time to explain, no time to reason with her. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and he froze. A man stepped inside, scanning the room before his gaze landed on Nalia. Zayden's instincts screamed at him. "Stay calm," he murmured under his breath, eyes narrowing. The man approached slowly, deliberately, but before he could reach her, Zayden was on his feet. Moving faster than anyone would have expected, he intercepted the stranger, his presence alone radiating authority and silent danger. "Can I help you?" Zayden asked, his tone controlled but icy. The man hesitated, clearly calculating. "Just looking for someone," he said, voice smooth but cold. Zayden's jaw tightened. "She's not your business," he said. The words carried a weight that made the man falter. Nalia's eyes were wide, fear flickering through her expression, and Zayden reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I've got you," he said softly, his presence steadying her. The man's patience snapped, and he took a step closer, but Zayden's movement was a blur, quick, precise, and entirely controlled. He blocked the path, his gaze sharp, warning silent but unmistakable. The man's bravado faltered under the intensity of it. "You need to leave," Zayden said, voice low but deadly calm. The stranger lingered for a heartbeat longer before finally turning on his heel and slipping out of the cafe. Zayden exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the rush of adrenaline, and turned to Nalia. "Are you okay?" he asked, worry clear in his eyes. I think so," she said, her voice shaky but trying to be brave. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together nervously. Zayden's protective instincts flared. "You don't belong in situations like this," he said, his tone softening. "You shouldn't have to worry about being followed or threatened." Nalia lifted her gaze to him, her expression conflicted, fear mixed with something else, something that made his chest tighten. "Then what am I supposed to do?" she asked softly. "You stay close to me," he replied, more firmly this time. "Until it's safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." Her eyes searched his, and she saw something there, a promise, an unspoken vow that went beyond words. She felt the pull between them, stronger now, more dangerous, more urgent. Over the next few days, Zayden's presence in her life became constant. He arranged for security, subtle enough not to frighten her, but vigilant, unyielding. Nalia, initially hesitant, began to trust him, drawn not just by his power, but by the quiet intensity, the care, and the vulnerability he only showed to her. They found themselves laughing over coffee, sharing stories about their pasts, and slowly, the walls around Zayden's heart began to crumble. Nalia, in turn, felt a connection she hadn't anticipated, drawn to the mysterious billionaire whose life was shrouded in danger yet softened by moments of tenderness when he was with her. Then one evening, as they walked through a dimly lit park, Zayden paused, taking her hand in his. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low, urgent. Nalia looked up, concern flashing in her eyes. "What is it?" "I can't explain everything right now," he admitted, glancing over his shoulder, tense. "But you're in danger. And it's not just random. Someone from my past, someone dangerous, knows about you." Fear surged through her, but it was mixed with determination. "Then we deal with it," she said, her grip on his hand tightening. "Together." Zayden looked at her, stunned by the strength in her voice, the courage in her eyes. For the first time, he realized that the feelings he had for her were no longer just admiration or attraction, they were deeper, more consuming. She had become the center of his world, and he would fight to protect her, no matter the cost. As they walked in silence, the night wrapping around them, Zayden made a silent vow. Whoever threatened Nalia, whoever dared to touch the life they were building together, would face him. And this time, he wasn't running from danger. He was walking toward it, with her by his side. The night air was thick with tension as Zayden parked a block away from Nalia's apartment. His eyes scanned the streetlights, every shadow, every movement. Marek Vale's presence lingered like a phantom in the corners of his mind, a threat he had hoped to keep at bay. But now, it had come too close. Nalia fumbled with her keys, unaware of the two figures crouched across the street, silent, waiting. Zayden stepped from the shadows, his presence a shield. "Let me," he murmured, moving quickly to her side. She stiffened at his sudden proximity, but the fear in her eyes made him all the more determined. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Danger," he said bluntly, eyes scanning. "Stay close to me." Her breath hitched as the figures moved suddenly, quick as panthers. Before either of them could react, a hand clamped over Nalia's mouth, and she felt herself being pulled backward. She screamed into the silence, panic flashing through her. Xaden moved like a shadow himself, fast and lethal, tackling one of the men with precise force. The struggle was fierce but brief. The second man, realizing Xaden was a threat far greater than he anticipated, released Nalia and backed away, fleeing into the night. Nalia stumbled into Xaden's arms, her heart hammering. Who was that?" she whispered, trembling. He held her close, the warmth of his body anchoring her fear. "It's over now," he said, though the tension in his jaw betrayed the anger simmering beneath. "You're safe with me." She began, her voice shaking, but he silenced her with a soft press of his lips to her forehead. "Sure," he murmured. "I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." They returned to his apartment, the night swallowing them in shadows and urgency. Inside, Xaden moved with a controlled frenzy, securing doors, checking cameras, ensuring no threat lingered. Nalia watched him, fascination mingling with awe. Here was a man who wielded power with precision, but whose heart, she felt it, was tethered to her. You're incredible," she said softly. Xaden paused, glancing at her with a look that was raw and unfiltered. "No," he said quietly. "I'm dangerous. I make enemies. And tonight, you saw why I can't keep you completely safe." Fear flared in Nalia's eyes, but it was tempered with something fiercer, something unyielding. "Then we face it together," she said, stepping closer, taking his hands in hers. "I'm not leaving." Something in Xaden shifted then, a wall cracking inside him. He had spent years keeping people at a distance, protecting himself with wealth, power, and control. And yet, here was someone willing to face danger with him, someone who saw him, not the billionaire, not the empire, but him. The days that followed were a tense mix of intimacy and vigilance. Xaden's team monitored every movement, every shadow, while he and Nalia navigated a fragile routine of stolen moments, coffee at dawn, late-night walks under the cover of darkness, whispered conversations that carried the weight of their growing connection. One evening, sitting across from her at their favorite cafe, Xaden reached across the table, brushing a stray curl from her face. "You're braver than anyone I've ever known," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm scared," Nalia admitted, voice low, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I trust you. I trust you with me." The words struck him with the force of a revelation. He wanted to tell her everything, to lay bare the chaos of his life, the enemies, the secrets. But more than that, he wanted to protect her from the weight of his world. Yet he couldn't hide the truth forever, not from someone who had already claimed his heart. Days later, Marek Vale struck again. This time, there was no warning. Nalia was taken in a blur of motion, a black van swallowing her into its shadowed interior before she could scream. Xaden's blood ran cold. Rage, fear, and something deeper, more primal, surged through him. He called in every favor, every contact, mobilizing resources with precision. His empire, usually an abstract web of deals and money, became a weapon. Every move, every tactic, every ally he had was thrown into the hunt. And through it all, his mind was singularly focused on her, Nalia Brooks, the woman who had walked into his life like sunlight through a storm. Hours later, he found her, bound and frightened, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Marek stood nearby, a smug expression on his face. "I warned you," Marek said, voice dripping with venom. "Some people aren't meant to be protected." Xaden didn't respond. He stepped forward, every muscle coiled, every heartbeat a drum of fury. "Let her go," he said, voice low, dangerous, unyielding. Marek laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Or what?" Xaden advanced, his movement fluid, precise, controlled, but lethal. The fight was swift, a blur of action and strategy. By the time it was over, Marek lay restrained, groaning, defeated, and Nalia was free, trembling but alive. Xaden enveloped her in his arms, holding her as if the world itself could crumble around them and it wouldn't matter. "You're safe," he whispered repeatedly, pressing his lips to her hair, to her temple. "I've got you. I'll always have you." Tears streamed down her face, but she clung to him, drawing strength from the intensity of his devotion. I love you," she whispered, and the words struck him deeper than any threat, any danger, any enemy ever could. "I love you too," he said fiercely, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "You are mine. Always." That night, as they sat together, holding each other in the quiet aftermath, the weight of everything they had faced pressed upon them, but it was tempered with a profound sense of belonging. They were no longer two strangers at a cafe table. They were partners, lovers, allies against a world that had tried to tear them apart. And in that quiet moment, as the city pulsed beyond the windows, Xaden knew one thing with unshakable certainty: he would fight to the ends of the earth for Nalia. For her laughter, her courage, her heart. For the way she had asked to share a table and, in doing so, had claimed his. The city was quiet the next morning, but Xaden hardly noticed. He had stayed awake all night, ensuring Nalia was safe, his mind spinning through every possible threat, every contingency, every mistake that could have cost her life. She slept, curled against him on the couch in his apartment, her breathing steady now, her face pale but peaceful. He watched her for a long moment, memorizing every curve of her face, the delicate arch of her eyebrows, the gentle rise and fall of her chest. He had protected empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and faced danger that would have broken most men, but nothing had ever mattered more than keeping her safe. When Nalia stirred, blinking against the morning light, she looked up at him, eyes still hazy from sleep. "Xaden," she murmured, her voice soft and fragile. "You're awake," he said, a rare softness threading through his normally controlled tone. "I'm okay," she replied, though the memory of last night's terror lingered in her eyes. "Thanks to you." He shook his head. "No thanks necessary. You're not just anyone, Nalia. You're you." His voice caught on the words, but he didn't stop speaking. "You're brave, you're strong, and somehow, you've become the center of everything I care about. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Not Marek, not anyone." Tears pooled in her eyes, and she reached up, brushing a finger along his cheek. "You've already done that, Xaden. You've given me courage I didn't know I had. You make me feel safe, even when the world is falling apart." His hand covered hers, pressing it against his chest. "Then let's face the world together. No more running. No more hiding. Just us." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of recovery and reconnection. Nalia regained her composure, returning to her studies, while Xaden balanced the complexities of his empire with the intensity of his devotion. Their love deepened with each passing day, not rushed, not forced, but growing stronger, rooted in trust, shared danger, and the unspoken acknowledgement that they were each other's anchor. One evening, they found themselves back at the small cafe where it had all begun. The same amber glow of lights, the faint murmur of conversations, the scent of coffee and baked bread, it all felt familiar, comforting. Xaden led Nalia to the same table, the one she had asked to share on that fateful night. "I can't believe we're back here," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "It feels surreal." "It feels right," he replied, sitting down opposite her, his hands resting on the table, fingers brushing hers. "I wanted to bring you back here. To the beginning. To where it all started. To remind us of how far we've come." Nalia smiled, but there was a glint of anticipation in her eyes. "Far, but not done, I hope." Xaden's gaze locked on hers, steady and unwavering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box, setting it on the table between them. Her breath caught instantly. "Nalia Brooks," he began, his voice low, deliberate, trembling slightly with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "From the moment you asked to share my table, I knew something had shifted in me. Something I didn't expect, something I couldn't control. You've been brave, beautiful, kind, and fierce in ways that have left me completely undone. I've protected empires, fought battles, and faced enemies that would break most men, but you are the fight I want. The life I want. The future I want." Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with tears as he opened the box, revealing a ring that glinted under the cafe's warm light. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Nalia. Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The soft murmur of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the distant city noise, all faded into the background. There was only him and her, and the undeniable truth between them. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling with joy and relief. "Yes, Xaden. I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she leaned across the table, their foreheads touching in a quiet, intimate moment. The air between them shimmered with relief, love, and the promise of everything yet to come. Outside, the city continued its relentless pulse, unaware of the love story that had reached its beginning in earnest. Inside, at that small table, two hearts beat in perfect unison. Zayden, the billionaire, and Nalia, the courageous, beautiful woman who had walked into his life with a simple question, had found their forever. And as they sat there, hands entwined, eyes locked, and hearts full, it was clear to both of them that the question that had started it all, "Can I share this table?" was only the first of countless moments that would define their lives together. No threat could touch them now. No danger could break them. They had survived the storm, and together, they had found something stronger than fear, stronger than wealth, stronger than fate itself. The future stretched out before them, bright and endless, and for the first time in years, Zayden Crosswell felt truly, irrevocably free. Not free from danger, not free from the weight of his responsibilities, but free because he had found the one person who made every risk, every battle, every sleepless night worth it. Nalia leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling the warmth of her presence settle into him. This was home. This was safety. This was love. And for the billionaire who had never been chosen before, for the woman who had dared to ask a simple question, it was the beginning of forever. If you felt anything while listening to this story, if it made your heart race, made you smile, or reminded you that real love still exists, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button to support the channel, subscribe so you never miss a new romance story, and turn on notifications to stay close to every heartbeat, every twist, every unforgettable love. And I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country, your corner of the world. Your support helps this channel grow, and your comments inspire the next love story.